I've been doing volunteer search and rescue in northern Maine for 6 years. I want to establish that clearly because I think it matters for how you receive what I'm about to tell you. I am not someone who frightens easily in the field. I have seen the aftermath of exposure deaths, fall injuries, animal encounters. I've recovered people who didn't make it, and I've done that job with the composure the job requires. In 6 years, I had never refused to approach a recovery site. I had never told my team coordinator I would not go further than a certain point. I did both of those things on the third missing person call in that region of Maine that followed the same pattern. This is that call. The missing subject was a 34-year-old man, experienced solo winter hiker, had set out on a 4-day loop in January and missed his check-in on day 3. By the time we were called, he'd been missing for approximately 72 hours, in temperatures that had reached -18 overnight. The statistical reality of that is not something you can pretend away when you've done this work long enough. We found his camp on the second hour of the search. Tent intact, sleeping bag and pad inside, food supply untouched, pack against the tent wall. The stove had been used. There was a cup with frozen coffee residue on the ground sheet. Whatever had happened, it had happened fast. He'd been at camp, he'd been comfortable, and then he hadn't been at camp. The smell hit us about 40 feet past the campsite. Everyone on the team stopped at the same moment. You don't need experience with this specific smell to recognize it. Your body does that for you, immediately, before you've taken a second breath. Sweet overwrought, cloying, wrong in a way that registers as biological threat before any cognitive process has named it. The team leader looked at me. I looked at him. We continued. We found the first remains 20 feet further. I'm going to be specific because specificity is what makes this different from an animal attack, and the difference matters to me. What we found was not a scatter pattern. Wolf kills, coyote kills, predator kills under competitive pressure. They produce scatter. They produce drag evidence. They produce the chaotic geography of multiple animals feeding at speed. This produced none of that. The remains were in a contained area no larger than 10 feet across. The long bones, femur, tibia, humerus, had been cracked at the midshaft with a force that the state medical examiner later described, carefully and with evident discomfort, as requiring a pressure load inconsistent with any known predator in the region. Cracked and then hollowed, the marrow fully extracted. The bones that remained were clean in a way that takes sustained attention to produce. Some bones were missing entirely and have never been recovered. The position of the remains was not random. I've thought carefully about whether I'm imposing a pattern on what was simply chaos, and I don't believe I am. What remained had been placed. The word I keep using, the word several of us used independently in the debrief, is arranged. Like something that had finished and then organized what was left. I don't have a framework for what that means about the thing that did it. I just know what we saw. The tracks led north from the site. Bipedal, deeply impressed. When I placed my boot beside one of the prints, my size 11 disappeared inside it with room remaining. Spaced in a stride pattern that, if I'm being precise about it, suggests something moving fast despite the size of the impressions. We followed them 40 feet, and a member of my team stopped walking. She pointed at the tree line to the east and said she was not going further. She is one of the most capable people I have worked with. I looked at the tree line. I didn't see it clearly. Dusk was coming in, and the trees were dark and dense, and what I saw was a shape in the darkness between trunks rather than a specific thing. But the shape had height I could establish relative to the trees around it, and the height was wrong by every measurement I had a reference for. It was the protrusions from the upper silhouette that I keep returning to, the irregular formations rising from the crown of the head against the dark sky, branching and asymmetric. It was still. It was watching us the way something watches when it is not concerned about being watched in return. We radioed in and waited for the official team at the campsite. I did not go back to the recovery site. The official report lists cause of death as animal attack, species undetermined. The medical examiner's report has a supplementary note about the fracture force on the long bones that uses the phrase mechanically inconsistent 3 times, without explaining what mechanism would be consistent. Nobody has followed up on that note in any official capacity. This was the 3rd call in that region in 2 years that followed the same pattern. Same smell, same contained arrangement of remains, same tracks, same missing bones. I know one of the other responders from the first call, and we have spoken about it once, briefly, and agreed not to speak about it again because neither of us has anything to add that makes it better. I still do this work. I don't know how to stop doing it. But when I get a call in that region now, I check the coordinates before I accept it. And if the coordinates fall within a certain range, I take longer than I should to call back. I tell myself it's because I need to prepare. I booked the cabin in October when the idea of a week alone in the northern Minnesota woods in January sounded like exactly what I needed. I'd been through a bad year. My divorce had finalized in September. I'd moved into an apartment I hated, and I wanted silence and cold and physical work and the specific peace that comes from a week with no obligations and no people. The cabin was remote, a 40-minute drive on an unmaintained forest road from the nearest town. No cell service, a propane generator for heat and basic electricity. I'd done solo winter camping before. I wasn't worried. The smell came the first night. I didn't identify it as a smell immediately. It arrived so gradually, sometime around midnight, that I was half asleep when I registered it. Sweet decay. The sweetness underneath stronger than the rot. Something organic and wrong that I spent 10 minutes lying awake trying to locate in the cabin before understanding it was coming from outside. I got up, checked the porch, the side of the cabin, the perimeter. Nothing. A clear night, -10, the snow undisturbed around the cabin. I went back to bed and told myself it was a frozen deer carcass somewhere in the trees and the wind had shifted. That was a reasonable explanation. I used it. The second night the smell returned, stronger, and with it came sound. Something moving in the snow around the cabin. Not one pass, circling, slow and continuous, the compression of frozen ground under significant weight, a circuit that took approximately 4 minutes per rotation. I lay in the dark and counted rotations. 7 times around the cabin before it stopped. I did not go to the window. I lay there with my heartbeat too loud and waited for morning. In the daylight, I found the deer. It was about 60 feet from the cabin's north face, between 2 birch trees, and it had been there overnight. The snow around it was dark in a wide radius and already beginning to freeze into a reddish crust. The carcass had been opened from the chest cavity and worked with a precision and completeness that I cannot attribute to any animal in that region. The organs gone. The long muscle masses stripped away from the bones with a thoroughness that left the skeleton almost surgical in its cleanliness. The femurs had been cracked, both of them cleanly, requiring force I don't have a reference point for, and hollowed. Whatever had done this had consumed everything of caloric value from that animal and left the rest arranged in a way that felt considered. Not the scatter of a predator feeding under pressure, something that had taken its time. The tracks leading away from the carcass were bipedal, large, widely spaced, deeply pressed into what was at the time 6 inches of compacted snow over frozen ground. I followed them 20 feet before I stopped and went back inside. The third night I looked out the window. I saw it for perhaps 5 seconds in the moonlight before it moved back into the trees. I have tried many times to describe the scale of it accurately, and I think the most honest description I can give is that it appeared to be the result of something human-shaped being stretched. The same basic architecture of a body, but pulled vertically and horizontally, past the point where it retains any human quality. The height was close to 10 feet. The limbs were wrong in their length. The rib cage was visible through the skin across the front of the torso, not as a subtle anatomical detail, but as individual ribs pressed hard against the inside of the skin, each one distinct, like something trying to get out. The head carried formations of bone that extended upward and outward, in the way dead branches extend from a storm-broken tree, asymmetric and wrong. It stood at the tree line and it was looking at the cabin with the focused attention of something that has been thinking about a problem from multiple angles. It was closer than it had been the night before. The fourth night, I barricaded the door with the kitchen table and the larger of the two wooden chairs and sat in the center of the main room with the propane lantern on full and a hunting knife I knew would do nothing, and waited. At approximately 3 in the morning, the door handle moved. Slowly, fully, the complete range of motion of the handle depressed and held, then released. Then nothing. I left at first light. I didn't pack fully. I took what I could carry quickly and I left the rest. On the way to my truck, I walked close enough to the cabin's perimeter to look at the snow. I wish I hadn't. The tracks around the cabin were multiple circuits, concentrated and overlapping, at least a dozen full rotations, probably more, compressed together in a ring around the building. The ring from the fourth night was close, much closer than the ring from the third night, which was closer than the ring from the second. Whatever it had been doing each night was a calibration. Each night it had determined how close it could get. I looked up the cabin listing when I got home. Buried in the reviews, dated the previous February, a single line from a guest who had stayed one night and checked out early, mentioned a smell they couldn't locate, and said they hadn't slept well. 1 star. No further detail. I didn't leave a review. I didn't know how to say what needed to be said in a way that wouldn't get me dismissed. I think about whoever is staying there this winter. I think about it more than I should. I've hunted with Marcus since we were 19. 15 years of early mornings, long silences, and the specific kind of trust that builds when you spend enough time alone in the woods with someone. I know how he moves. I know how he talks. I know how he handles himself when things go wrong. The steadiness of him, the practicality, the way he's never once in 15 years lost his head over anything the forest threw at us. You know a person that deeply after that long. You know when something is wrong with them. What came back from the trees that afternoon looked like Marcus. It was not Marcus. This was 3 winters ago on a private hunting plot in northern Minnesota that a friend of ours leases annually. Remote enough that you won't see another vehicle for the full week. Close enough to feel like a reasonable risk. We'd done the trip twice before without incident. Log cabin, 2 bedrooms, a wood stove that throws serious heat, trail cameras on the northern and eastern edges of the property. The second morning, Marcus was up before me. I heard him at 5:30, assumed coffee and gear. When I came down at 6, he was gone. Note on the table saying he'd gone to check the northern trail camera and would be back before 9. He wasn't back at 9, or 10, or 11. I walked the northern trail at 11:30. The camera was where it always was. Marcus wasn't. The card hadn't been checked, the camera undisturbed. I stood there calling his name into the bare trees and got nothing back but the dead silence of a Minnesota winter forest that has nothing moving in it. -15. He'd been out there in that for over 5 hours. I went back to the cabin for the radio. He was sitting on the front steps, full gear, pack at his feet, rifle across his knees, looking at the ground. He didn't react when I called his name from the tree line. Didn't react when I got close. Only looked up when I put a hand on his shoulder and said his name directly at him. And in that fraction of a second before his face arranged itself into something familiar, I saw something I've spent 3 years trying to accurately describe. His eyes focused from very far away, the way a screen comes back from sleep, something returning to a place it had briefly vacated. He said he'd gotten turned around, that he'd been sitting for a while to get his bearings. He was calm in a way that was wrong, not the calm of a man who'd been frightened and come through it, but the calm of something that had been removed from him. He didn't want to discuss it. He said he was fine and went inside. He didn't eat that night. I want you to understand what that means. Marcus is the kind of man who treats food in the field like a logistical problem to be aggressively solved. 15 years, never once skipped a meal outside. He sat across from me at the table while I ate and looked at the window. The temperature outside was -17. He'd been out in that for the better part of 6 hours and he wasn't hungry. I couldn't sleep. Something sat wrong in my chest that I was calling worry about Marcus, and was actually something older than worry. Around 2 in the morning, the smell came through the walls. Sweet in a way that decay isn't usually sweet. Underneath the rot was something almost floral, cloying and wrong in a way your body catalogs as dangerous before your brain has processed it. I lay in my bunk and it got stronger. Then the sound. Not a footstep, a compression of the frozen ground that I felt through the floorboards, slow and deliberate, moving along the side of the cabin. Patient, methodical, circling. I went to the window. 3 seconds. That's how long it was at the tree line before it moved back into the forest and was gone. 3 seconds was enough. The moonlight on snow backlit it clearly enough that I have never been able to convince myself I didn't see what I saw. The height of it, 9 feet at minimum, possibly more, and carrying almost no weight. Nothing on those bones but the skin stretched over them like something trying to be contained. The protrusions from the skull like dead branches, asymmetric and wrong. The chest caved inward between the ribs in the specific concavity of something that has been starving for longer than a body should survive starvation. It moved from the tree line into the trees in the time it takes to blink, and it left nothing behind it in the snow. No sound, no disturbed branches. Marcus's room was empty. He was standing at the living room window with both hands flat on the glass, looking out at the trees. He didn't respond when I said his name. He stood there for the better part of an hour, and then went back to bed, and in the morning had no memory of it. None. He asked me at breakfast why I looked like I hadn't slept. We left after breakfast. 30 feet off the eastern trail on the way out, we found the whitetail buck, or what was left of it. The blood in the snow was still dark, 12 hours old at most. What had been done to that animal in 12 hours I cannot account for using anything I know about predators. The carcass had been worked with a thoroughness and deliberateness no wolf pack produces. Bones stripped completely clean, the long bones cracked and the marrow extracted. The rib cage opened with a force that fractured the bones rather than separating them at the joints. Certain bones missing entirely. No scatter, no drag marks, no signs of competition or fighting over the kill. A single feeding. One thing, working alone, efficiently, and without waste. I did the math on the amount of tissue consumed and I stopped doing the math. Marcus has been different since that trip. Nothing dramatic. Nothing you'd point to if you didn't know him well. He doesn't like being cold anymore. Sometimes doesn't answer to his name the first time you say it. When we eat together, there's a focus to it, a specific quality of attention to the food that wasn't there before. Small things. The kind of things you notice after 15 years of knowing someone. We haven't been back to that property. He hasn't suggested it. Neither have I.